Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. It's about that time of year when we see a lot of year-end reviews, so I thought it would be kind of fun to give an update on all the Apple products that I've used in 2022 that are in Apple's current lineup, and do a rundown of my thoughts on them after using them this year. That is going to include the M1 Mac Mini, 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip, 5th gen M1 iPad Air, M2 MacBook Air, iPhone 14 Pro, and finally the 2nd generation AirPods Pros. I've used each piece of this gear for hundreds of hours, and my circumstances for how I use a lot of it has changed over the course of the year. Along with the product releases, we've had software updates, and quite a few things have changed, particularly in the last half of the year. So I do have some different thoughts on this stuff than I probably did 6 months ago. Just to keep everyone's sanity, I'm gonna break this up into 2 videos, and I'm gonna go through all of this in chronological order from when I used each product. That means this week will be the M1 Mac Mini, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and the M1 iPad Air, and next week will be the M2 MacBook Air, iPhone 14 Pro, and the AirPods Pro. So if you want to check out next week's video, just subscribe and hit that little bell icon and you'll get notified when that drops. The first product that I want to talk about today is the one that I've used the most out of any of these, including my iPhone, and that is the M1 Mac Mini. I'm pretty sure that I bought the Mini in the spring of 2021, and I used it up until the summer of last year, and frankly, I probably could still use it for everything I do now if I wanted. I think the M1 Mac Mini is a pretty underrated machine. We've been kind of spoiled when it comes to Apple Silicon. Even the base M1 machines will still run almost everything you throw at them smoothly, and the M1 Mac Mini is no exception. I spent countless hours working on this machine, editing videos for the channel and doing all kinds of creative work, the software development, and the only thing that I really didn't touch was gaming, which honestly you're probably not expecting to do on these machines anyway. The M1 Mac Mini was my first attempt at moving my entire workflow to my Mac. Previous to this, I was doing a lot of software stuff, mobile development, that kind of thing on my Mac, and all of my video work on a PC. So I did as much research as I could, finding an affordable configuration that would satisfy all my requirements. And given what I know now, I would have tweaked that just a touch. I decided to go with 16 gigs of RAM and keep the base 256 gig storage option. I wanted more than the base 8 gigs of RAM just because I saw some instances where it was maxing out when people were video editing. And I just skirted around upgrading the internal SSD by using an external enclosure to save some cache. If I were to do it all over, I might have bumped the internal storage to 512 gigs. In most cases, 256 is more than enough, and it is an expensive upgrade anytime you're bumping up storage in Apple products. But if you have any apps that you need to run on the internal drive, and just for ease of use, sometimes it's nice to not have to worry about how much storage you're taking up. For me, specifically for things like mobile development, that can fill up your disk space pretty quickly, as I'm sure most people who work in Xcode can attest. And it's much easier to just leave that stuff installed to its default location and use it natively. Anything related to video editing though, I would still use the external drive just because I constantly have so much data moving in and out from the drive. It just gets a lot of use, so if anything is gonna fail, I'd much rather it be the external drive rather than the one that's inside the machine. You can get super performant external SSD enclosures that have very similar speeds to the internal drives on the base M1 or M2 machines, so you're really not sacrificing much there. And I've been using this USB 4 enclosure with a Western Digital SN770 drive in it for the better part of a year on all my devices and never had a problem with it. I would just leave it plugged into the back of the Mac Mini into one of the 2 available Thunderbolt ports. Unfortunately, that only leaves you with one left, and honestly, I've always found that port selection a bit underwhelming. For a desktop machine, you've only got a couple of USB-C ports and a couple of USB-A ports, and for a stationary desktop machine, especially since the previous versions of the Mac Mini had a lot more than this, it leaves a lot to be desired. There's an HDMI port, which is nice because you don't have to use a Thunderbolt port on your display, and it's nice to have an Ethernet port there if you plan on using a wired connection, but I just found to effectively use this, I always had to use a hub. The 3.5mm audio output is also in a weird place on the back, which is unfortunate given that in most cases you'll want to use it. The internal speaker on this machine is about the worst thing imaginable. It sounds about on par with a $150 netbook from 2010, but in general, without a hub, it was just a huge pain to plug stuff into the Mac Mini. The bottom was hard plastic, so whenever I tried to hook up a USB cable, it would just slide around on my desk. But the ports and the internal speaker are really the only complaints that I have with this machine. Most of the time, it would run dead silent. I was able to do anything I needed on it without it feeling like it was holding me back in any way. And for a desktop, it's super tiny and easy to place on your desk. I've been patiently waiting for the M2 Mac Mini to come out, and there have been tons and tons of rumors and release dates that have come and gone for it. But when it does come out, I definitely want to check it out. Hopefully 2023 is the year that we finally see that show up, because I am a huge fan of the Mini. Contrasting from the smallest Mac I used this year to the largest, the next machine that I got my hands on was the 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip. This was the base model with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, and was definitely the most powerful laptop that I've owned personally. When I was choosing between this and the 14-inch model, there was a voice in the back of my head saying, get the 16-inch because of the bigger screen and better cooling. And I think that kind of turned out to be the wrong choice. I'd assumed that when I'd got this, I'd mostly just be using it at home like I do with all my other machines, but I ended up traveling with this a lot, and it's kind of inconvenient to travel with. Especially if you're on flights or on a train where the seats are all crammed together. It can be a bit of a pain to haul this thing out and work on it. And I think for most tasks, the 14-inch model is still more than enough. Outside of that one particular thing, I don't think that I can complain about anything in the 16-inch Pro. The display is one of the best that I've seen in a laptop outside of an OLED with the 120Hz Liquid Retina XDR screen. And the speakers are hands down the best that I've heard in a laptop. Personally, I don't even see the need to use external speakers with the 16-inch Pro, even if you've got it at your desk setup. Unless you're looking for more volume or you want a legitimate studio sound or something. I often wonder if Apple is ever going to drop a set of speakers. It just seems like a natural fit for their product line, given that they're already putting great audio in a lot of their flagship devices. They've made such a huge improvement on the audio side of things over the old Intel MacBook Pros, and I think that could be said for the design as well. You've got more ports and SD card reader that they brought back, which for someone like me who uses those on a daily basis is very nice to have. You can hook up 2 external displays to this machine, as all the ports are Thunderbolt 4, or the base M series chips below this that are in the MacBook Airs and 13-inch Pros are only Thunderbolt 3. That really leads into performance, which I found to be amazing. I never had any hangups trying to do anything on the M1 Pro, and I'd be able to multitask being in calls while having software development builds running in the background, editing videos, 3D rendering, you name it. And not once did I experience any lag on this thing. Not only that, but the battery life on the 16-inch model was outstanding. I could have this on battery power and get well over a full day's work on here. And not just web browsing, but doing some of those resource-heavy tasks that I just mentioned that do put a heavy load on the system. Outside of the size and it being somewhat clunky, it's really hard to find many flaws with the 16-inch Pro. I might look at a 14-inch refurbished model early next year to replace that machine, but that's all going to depend on when the next iteration of the Pro models come out. Regardless of that, I think this is one of those laptops that you can just buy and probably use for 6 or 7 years without ever feeling like you have to upgrade. Both that 16-inch Pro and the M1 Mac Mini were technically launched before 2022, but are still current models in Apple's lineup. And I was using those pretty early in the year, but come spring, I made my first purchase that was included in a 2022 Apple launch event. The 5th generation M1 iPad Air. Now, I upgraded from the previous generation Air with the A series chip, and honestly, I don't find that there's a ton of difference between the two. There isn't a whole lot that you can do on an iPad where you're really pushing things as far as processing power goes, at least with what I've been using it for. It's identical looks-wise. I even used the same Logitech Combo Touch case that I had on my 4th Gen Air, which, by the way, has been a great little case and keyboard combo. But it has the same screen, the same speakers, and while the M1 is a lot more powerful of a chip and you get a lot more RAM included, going from, I think it's 4 gigs to 8, I'm still waiting for some kind of use case to justify making the move up. Supposedly, Stage Manager with external monitor support will only be available on iPads with M series chips when it releases into production. When that came out on the beta, I played around with it and I was like, okay, this is starting to make a little bit more sense, and I've got a little bit more justification for owning this particular model. But I believe that's just rolling out to production, so the jury is still out there. When external monitor support seems functional, or when DaVinci Resolve comes out on iPad and I've used that, Maybe I'll feel a little bit better about this purchase if it starts to pull ahead with supported functionality, but in its current state and for what I use this for, viewing content, editing photos, notes, that kind of thing, I probably could have stayed with the 4th Gen Air. I've also noticed that battery life isn't quite as good as on my 4th Gen Air, but it's hard to tell if that's caused by software or if it's because of the added demands of the M1 chip. I did take a chance and buy this on potential at the time, with a bunch of rumors swirling about Final Cut Pro being made available for the iPad and some other apps, and we're around 9 months later and that hasn't come to fruition, and I'm still waiting to be able to take advantage of the power that's crammed into here. If you put that aside and just strictly look at the M1 iPad Air as a tablet, it's still a fantastic device. I really like the colors that they came out with on this release. I grabbed Starlight, which matches the rest of my gear, and it's super small and easy to pack around with you. You can use the 2nd Gen Apple Pencil that clips onto the top, and it doesn't need a dongle to charge, which Apple decided should be a thing now. With the 10.9-inch screen, I find the colors are very similar to my phone, which is why I prefer editing photos for Instagram and social on here, because I know they're going to look the same on my phone. And the pencil is a bit nicer to use than a mouse. The speakers are decent with good clarity and decent volume levels, and I'm not disappointed with it in general. I just wish that having this much power in a tablet was more useful at this point, but I guess it's still a wait and see. Looking back on this and looking at what the price is for these now, I just can't see myself rebuying this. I can't decide on whether I drop down and get the 10th gen regular iPad or go the opposite route and pick up the iPad Pro. Going forward, if I wanted something that was just for super casual use, I'd probably just get the regular iPad because there aren't enough differences between it and the Air, even with the strange 1st gen Apple Pencil support that you need a dongle to effectively use, and the colors, which I'm not a huge fan of. On the other hand, if I wanted something that did have some more tangible, noticeable upgrades over the Air, the iPad Pro has a bit nicer screen, you've got Thunderbolt 4 on the USB-C port, Face ID, I don't know, it's a tough decision, and the one thing that seems to be happening that's becoming more evident in 2022 is that Apple's product lineup has become pretty confusing, and it's tough to make sense of. Both MacBook M2 machines released this summer were also kind of head-scratching when you were comparing them to each other, and I will have more thoughts on that I'll get into next week when I talk about the M2 MacBook Air, along with the iPhone 14 Pro and the AirPods Pro Gen 2s. I've been using those devices a ton recently, and I have developed a few more thoughts on those, so if you want to check that out, stay tuned, and that will drop a week from today. Given all that we've gone over here today, I'd love to get everyone else's take on these 3 models or variants of them, and see if you've had similar or different experiences. So drop a comment down below with your thoughts on any of these machines, along with any questions that you might have about them. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button twice. If you want to see more tech-related content, or if you'd like to go around with me and test out various hot tubs to see if we can find a working time machine, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next upload.